The platform at St. Joe's Station wore the dust of 1,000 departures. It settled on Eleanor Ashford's shoulders like the weight of her past, fine and relentless, coating the dark wool of her traveling dress until she looked like something carved from Missouri clay. She stood alone in the mid-morning heat of May 15, 1876, one gloved hand gripping the handle of a battered leather valise, the other clutching a letter so worn from repeated readings that the creases threatened to tear it into pieces. Around her, the station thrummed with the organized chaos of westward expansion. Families loaded trunks onto wagons while children wove between legs and luggage, their laughter sharp as bird calls. Merchants shouted prices for supplies that would carry pioneers into territories still more idea than place. The air smelled of manure and steam of horses, and humanity pressed together in the peculiar perfume of transit points where everyone was coming from somewhere and heading towards something else. Nora stood perfectly still in the current of movement, an island of motionless tension, while life flowed around her. Her eyes, the color of winter slate, swept the platform in measured arcs, taking in faces, cataloging exits, noting who watched and who looked away. It was a habit learned in recent weeks, this constant surveillance, this assessment of threat. Back in Boston, she had moved through the world with the confidence of someone who belonged. Now she existed in the liminal space of the hunted, where every stranger might recognize her face from the newspaper illustrations that had run for 3 consecutive days. Teacher accused of poisoning senator's daughter. The headline lived behind her eyes, now burned there like an afterimage from staring too long at the sun. She could see it even with her eyes closed. Could see the sketch the artist had made from her photograph, how they had sharpened her features, made her look severe and calculating. The face of someone capable of murder. Nora shifted her weight, feeling the platform boards creak beneath her boots. She had been standing here for 2 hours, watching the morning train disgorge its passengers, scanning each face for the man described in the letter, still clutched in her hand. Tall, the letter had said, dark hair going gray at the temples, a scar through his left eyebrow from the war. He would be wearing a brown hat and carrying a yellow rose. No such man had emerged from the train. No yellow rose had appeared among the platform crowd. The other passengers had dispersed into the maze of streets beyond the station, absorbed into St. Joe like rainwater into thirsty ground, until Nora stood alone with her valise and her fear and the terrible certainty that she had made yet another catastrophic mistake. Behind her, through the station house windows, she could see the ticketmaster watching. His name was Patterson, and his pity had evolved over the past 2 hours from sympathetic to uncomfortable. He kept glancing at her, then away, then back again, as if she were some puzzle he could solve through observation. Nora did not want to be observed. She had spent the past 3 weeks trying to become invisible, to shed the identity of Eleanor Ashford, disgraced teacher, accused murderess, and take on instead the simpler shape of a mail-order bride traveling west to meet a rancher she had never seen. The deception should have troubled her more than it did. She had been raised to value honesty, to believe that truth was the foundation of all moral action. Her father, before his own disgrace and death, had taught her that medicine required absolute truthfulness. A doctor who lied about symptoms could kill as surely as poison. But recent events had taught Nora a harder lesson. Sometimes truth was a luxury that only the secure could afford. Sometimes survival required a more flexible relationship with facts. She had answered Caleb Hart's advertisement not out of romantic longing, but out of desperate calculation. His notice in the matrimonial news had been different from the others. Most men advertised for wives with language that promised comfort or romance, painting pictures of domestic bliss on the frontier. Caleb Hart's notice had been blunt to the point of harshness. He needed a woman willing to work. He needed someone practical. He had written in careful, unpracticed script, someone who would not ask too many questions about the past. That last line had made Nora pause, her finger hovering over the advertisement in the weeks-old newspaper she had found in a boarding-house parlor. It suggested that Caleb Hart had his own secrets, his own reasons for seeking a wife through correspondence, rather than through the normal social channels of courtship. She had written to him that same evening, composing her letter with the same care she had once used preparing lesson plans for the daughters of Boston's elite. She had told him she was a teacher. That much was true. She had told him she sought a life of purpose beyond the suffocating confines of drawing-room society. Also true, though incomplete. She had not told him about the dead girl, had not mentioned the accusation, the scandal, the warrant that would be issued as soon as the senator's family pushed hard enough, had not explained that she was not so much seeking a new life as fleeing the destruction of her old one. Now, standing on a platform in Missouri, while the sun climbed toward noon and sweat began to bead beneath the high collar of her dress, Nora wondered if her deception had been for nothing. Perhaps Caleb Hart had changed his mind. Perhaps he had met someone else. Perhaps he had read something in her letters that warned him away, some subtle indication that Eleanor Ashford was not what she seemed. Or perhaps a darker voice whispered in her mind he had seen the newspapers. The story had been picked up by papers beyond Boston. The senator had made sure of that, using his influence to spread the narrative of his daughter's death as widely as possible. Tragic young life cut short by trusted teacher. There had been illustrations, descriptions. Her name repeated so many times it had stopped sounding like a name at all, becoming instead a synonym for betrayal and violence. Nora forced herself to breathe slowly, fighting the panic that threatened to close her throat. She could not afford to break down here in public where Patterson watched and others might notice. She had spent the last of her courage getting to St. Joe, had used the last of her money on the train ticket and 3 nights in the cheapest hotel she could find. She had perhaps $4 remaining in her reticule, enough for a telegram back to Boston if she dared send one, not enough to start over somewhere else. The sound of boots on platform boards made her turn sharply, heart hammering. A man approached, but he was too young, too clean-shaven, clearly a merchant from his clothes. He tipped his hat as he passed, and Nora managed a tight nod in return, her face a mask of polite neutrality that hid the desperation churning beneath her ribs. She thought about her father in moments like this, thought about the way he had looked the morning she found him in his study, the bottle of laudanum empty on his desk, his face peaceful in death, in a way it had never been during the final months of his life. He had been accused of negligence after a surgery went wrong, a wealthy patient who died under his care despite his best efforts. The man's family had sued, had dragged her father's name through the courts and the newspapers until his reputation lay in ruins. The verdict had been delivered on a Thursday. Her father had been dead by Sunday morning. Nora understood now what she had not understood then. He had not died from shame. He had died from the exhaustion of fighting a battle already lost, from the terrible clarity of seeing his future contract to nothing but more accusations, more trials, more people looking at him with suspicion instead of trust. He had chosen exit over endurance, and Nora had judged him for it, had thought him weak for giving up instead of fighting. She did not think that anymore. She understood too well now the weight of accusation, the way it crushed you beneath its mass until simply drawing breath felt like an act of defiance. She understood why someone might look at a bottle of laudanum and see mercy instead of sin. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it brought a strange calm. If Caleb Hart did not come, if this last desperate gamble failed, she knew now what her father had known. There were limits to what the human spirit could endure. There were endings that were choices, not failures, but not yet. Not while the morning still held possibility, not while the platform remained empty of brown hats and yellow roses, but also empty of lawmen with warrants and Boston detectives hired by grieving senators. Nora picked up her valise and walked to the bench that lined the station house wall. She sat carefully arranging her skirts, placing the bag at her feet. From this position, she could watch both the street entrance and the railway platform, could see anyone approaching from either direction. Patterson's face appeared in the window, briefly registering her movement, then withdrew. She imagined what he was thinking. Another abandoned bride, another woman's hope disappointed. The stations saw them regularly, women who traveled west on promises that dissolved like morning mist when tested against reality. The morning crawled toward afternoon. The platform emptied further as the next train time approached, then filled again as passengers arrived for the 2:15 eastbound. Nora watched them board with something close to longing. How simple it would be to stand to walk to the ticket window to purchase passage back toward the life she had fled. But no, that way led to trial to conviction that felt inevitable regardless of her innocence, led to scandal touching not just herself, but her few remaining family members. Her sister Margaret, in her comfortable Boston marriage, would have to answer questions about her disgraced sibling, would have to endure the whispers at charity events, the way conversations would stop when she entered rooms. Better this. Better to disappear into the vast anonymity of the Western Territories, to become someone else in a place where no one knew Eleanor Ashford's face or name or the terrible thing they said she had done. The eastbound train departed in a cloud of steam and noise, taking with it the last of Nora's safety. If Caleb Hart did not come today, she would have to make decisions, find work. Perhaps, though, women alone had limited options in frontier towns. Seek charity from churches that might ask questions she could not afford to answer, or make the choice her father had made, the one that ended all questions permanently. She was still sitting on the bench when the sun began its slow descent toward evening, painting the platform in shades of amber and gold that made everything look briefly beautiful despite the dust and poverty of it. Patterson emerged from the station house, his expression caught between sympathy and irritation. He approached with the careful steps of a man navigating difficult territory. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, "I hate to press, but the evening train will be arriving soon. If your situation has not resolved, I will need the bench for other passengers." Nora looked up at him. This man she did not know, who had witnessed the first day of her abandonment with such uncomfortable pity. "Of course," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. "I understand completely." "Is there anyone I can wire for you?" Patterson shifted his weight clearly, wishing to be anywhere but here. "Family, perhaps, or friends who might send funds." "Thank you, but I will manage." The lie came easily now, smooth as river stones worn by years of current. She had no one to wire, no one she dared contact. Margaret would feel obligated to help and obligated to ask questions. Better to let her sister believe Eleanor had simply vanished west, swallowed by distance and poor communication. Patterson nodded, relieved to have his duty discharged, and retreated to the safety of his ticket window. Nora remained on the bench as the evening train arrived, as passengers disembarked and dispersed, as the platform once again emptied to just her and her valise and her dwindling options. It was nearly sunset when the woman appeared. She materialized from the street side of the station, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where she was going and why. She was perhaps 50, dressed in a traveling suit of deep blue that marked her as respectable but not wealthy. Her face had the kind of strength that came from surviving difficult things, and her eyes missed nothing as they swept over Nora on the bench. "Miss Ashford," the woman said, not a question, but a statement. Nora's hand moved instinctively toward the valise, toward the small pistol hidden in its depths. "How do you know my name? Mr. Patterson mentioned your situation." The woman's voice carried a hint of amusement, as if she recognized Nora's defensive posture and found it familiar. "I am Mrs. Dorothy Brennan. I run a boarding house 3 streets from here. You have been waiting for someone who has not arrived." "Yes?" Nora kept her face neutral, giving nothing away. "And you find yourself in temporary difficulty." Again, not a question. Mrs. Brennan had clearly drawn her own conclusions from Patterson's gossip and Nora's continued presence on an empty platform. "I have sufficient funds." Another lie, but necessary. Mrs. Brennan's expression suggested she knew exactly how much truth that statement contained. "I have a room available. Clean linens, decent meals, and I do not ask questions of my boarders beyond their ability to pay." For a woman alone, that last quality is often more valuable than the first two. The kindness in the offer landed like a blow. Nora felt her throat tighten, felt the careful control she had maintained all day threaten to crack. She swallowed hard, forcing steadiness back into her voice. "That is very generous, but I could not possibly accept without knowing when I might be able to pay. You can, and you will." Mrs. Brennan's tone shifted from invitation to command. "I will not have a respectable young woman sleeping on a train platform in my town. You will stay at my establishment until your circumstances clarify. We will discuss payment when you are able. If you stay more than a few days, I expect honest work. I need help with laundry and cooking." The words hit Nora with unexpected force. Honest work. When was the last time anyone had offered her that, not pity, not charity, but work in exchange for shelter? A transaction she could accept without shame. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet." Mrs. Brennan picked up the valise before Nora could protest. "Supper is at 6, and you look like you have not eaten properly since you arrived." The boarding house sat 3 streets back from the station, a sturdy 2-story structure with white paint beginning to peel and green shutters faded by Missouri sun. Inside it smelled of bread and lye soap and coffee, the scent of domesticity so sharp it made Nora's eyes sting. How long since she had been somewhere that felt like home? The hotel rooms of her flight west had been anonymous spaces, temporary as breath. Before that, her small room at Miss Porter's school, surrounded by the ghosts of her ruined career. Before that, the house she had shared with her father, which had been sold to pay his debts after his death. Mrs. Brennan led her to a small room on the 2nd floor. It held a bed, a washstand, a chair, and a window that looked out over the street. After 3 nights in cramped hotel spaces, it felt almost luxurious. "Wash up," Mrs. Brennan said. "I will have water brought. Supper in 30 minutes." When the door closed, Nora sank onto the bed and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of despair. She pressed her hands over her face and breathed through the tightness in her chest, through the fear that had been building all day, through the terrible understanding that Caleb Hart was not coming and she had nowhere left to run. The 2 minutes passed. Nora lowered her hands, straightened her spine, and began to unpack her few belongings with mechanical precision. Despair was its own kind of surrender, and she had not come this far only to give up after a single day of waiting. Perhaps Caleb Hart had been delayed. Perhaps the letter explaining his lateness had gone astray. Perhaps tomorrow would bring the brown hat and yellow rose that today had failed to produce. She washed her face in the basin, pinned up her hair, and went down to supper, feeling steadier than she had any right to feel. The dining room held 6 other boarders, a mix of travelers and permanent residents that Mrs. Brennan introduced with brisk efficiency. 2 salesmen heading west with sample cases. A banker's widow waiting for the stage to Denver. A young couple bound for California, their faces bright with the kind of optimism that came from never having failed at anything important. And an older man who introduced himself as Jack Sterling, a freight hauler whose weathered face suggested he had seen most of what the frontier had to offer and been unimpressed by much of it. Mrs. Brennan presided over the table like a general commanding troops, efficient and sharp-eyed, serving roast chicken and potatoes and green beans with the air of someone who brooked no nonsense about portions or preferences. Nora ate slowly, feeling strength return with each bite, though whether it was the food or simply sitting in company after so many solitary meals, she could not say. Conversation flowed around the table, the usual talk of routes and weather, of opportunities west and troubles east. The banker's widow asked questions with genuine curiosity, drawing out stories from the other travelers. Eventually her attention turned to Nora. "And you, Miss Ashford, what brings you through St. Joe?" 7 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Nora set down her fork carefully, feeling the weight of their interest. She could deflect, could maintain the fiction of privacy. Or she could speak a version of the truth and see what happened. "I came to marry a rancher from Wyoming Territory," she said clearly. "He was supposed to meet me at the station this morning. He did not arrive." Silence fell across the table. Then Jack Sterling grunted, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "What is his name?" "Caleb Hart. He has a ranch somewhere in Wyoming." Nora watched Sterling's face for recognition. "I know Caleb Hart." Jack's weathered features showed surprise. "Hauled supplies to his place twice last year. Good man. Honest. Paid on time, which is rarer than you would think." He frowned, his expression growing thoughtful. "If he said he would be here, something is wrong. Caleb is not the type to make promises he will not keep." Hope flickered in Nora's chest like a candle in wind. "You are certain you are sure it is the same man?" "How many Caleb Harts do you think there are running cattle ranches in Wyoming?" Jack cut into his chicken with the kind of precision that suggested he was working through a problem. Tall fellow, dark hair going gray at the temples, built like he has spent his life working. "Got a scar here." He touched his left eyebrow. "From a Confederate bayonet at Antietam." The description matched the few details Caleb had provided in his letters. "That sounds right," Nora said carefully. "Then something has delayed him." Jack shrugged, returning to his meal. "Weather, probably. Spring flooding has been bad this year. Whole herds got caught in river valleys last month." He looked at Nora directly. "Give it a few more days. If Caleb made you a promise, he will keep it or die trying." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they raised a new fear. What if something had happened to Caleb? What if he was hurt, or worse? The possibility had not occurred to Nora before. She had assumed abandonment, not accident. Mrs. Brennan leaned forward, her voice pragmatic. "And if he cannot come, Miss Ashford needs to make plans. If he cannot, he will send word." Jack's certainty was absolute. That is the kind of man he is. Nora spent a restless night in the small room, listening to the sounds of St. Joe settling into darkness. Somewhere a dog barked. Voices drifted up from the street cowboys heading to saloons, families calling children home. The town lived and breathed around her, indifferent to her uncertainty, and she lay awake cataloging the limited options available to a woman alone with $4 and a warrant waiting in Boston. By morning, she had made a decision. She would wait one more day. If Caleb did not come by noon on the second day, she would need to reconsider everything, perhaps Mrs. Brennan would allow her to work for room and board until she could save enough for passage to somewhere else. Somewhere farther where Eleanor Ashford's name and face had not yet penetrated. She rose with the sun and helped Mrs. Brennan with breakfast, grateful for tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. She washed dishes, swept floors, beat rugs hung over the back porch railing. The work was simple and physical and blessedly free of thought. Noon came. No Caleb. Nora stood at the front window watching the street traffic pass, feeling each minute like a door closing. Mrs. Brennan appeared beside her, her expression carefully neutral. "There is a man at the station asking after you," she said quietly. Nora's heart stopped, then started again, painful and wild. "A man, Jack Sterling's boy, just came by. Said there is a man with travel dust on him asking Mr. Patterson about a Boston woman who was supposed to arrive 3 days ago." Mrs. Brennan paused. "Thought you would want to know." Nora did not remember deciding to move. She ran. Actually ran skirts hiked above her ankles, propriety, abandoned through the streets of St. Joe toward the station. People stared. She did not care. 3 days of waiting, 3 days of fear and abandonment and doubt, and now perhaps finally an ending that was not an ending, but a beginning. She saw him from half a block away. He stood on the platform beside a dusty horse, talking to Patterson, and even from a distance she could see he matched the description. Tall, just as Jack had said, with shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. His clothes were covered in dried mud and trail dust, and his hat, brown and battered, was pulled low against the sun. In his hand, wilted but unmistakable, a yellow rose. But it was what Nora saw beside him that made her footsteps slow, that sent ice through her veins despite the afternoon heat. A child, a little girl perhaps 6 years old, sitting on a small trunk near the horse. Her skin was several shades darker than Caleb's weathered tan, her hair in 2 neat braids, her dress simple but clean. She sat with the stillness of someone who had learned to be very quiet, her eyes tracking movement on the platform with careful attention. Nora's mind raced through possibilities, a ward perhaps, a servant's child. But no, the way the girl sat close to Caleb, the way his posture oriented toward her, even while talking to Patterson, spoke of something more intimate than casual responsibility. Caleb turned at Nora's approach. She saw his face clearly for the first time. He looked exhausted, deep lines bracketing his mouth, and his eyes gray. She noticed the color of storm clouds, held an expression she recognized from her father's medical practice. This was a man in pain, holding himself together through sheer will. "Miss Ashford," his voice was rough, as if he had spent days without water. "Eleanor Ashford, from Boston." "Yes?" Nora heard her own voice as if from a distance. "Are you Caleb Hart?" "I am." He took a step forward, seemed to remember the flower in his hand, and held it out. The petals were brown at the edges, the stem bent. "I am sorry this is not fresh. I am sorry I am late." The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Not, "I am sorry I am late," but "I am sorry I am late for you," as if her waiting specifically had caused him pain. Nora took the rose, their fingers brushing. His hands were calloused, scarred, the hands of someone who worked for every single thing he had. 3 days, she said quietly. I have been waiting 3 days. I know. He swayed slightly, caught himself. I was driving cattle east when I got caught in a flash flood near the Kansas border. Lost 2 days getting the herd to safety, another day riding here. He met her eyes directly. I sent a telegram when I could, but they said you had already left Boston. I hoped you would wait. I prayed you would wait. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. She waited hard. Been here the whole time. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, relief mixing with what looked like shame. He glanced at the child, then back to Nora. Before anything else, before we talk about what happens next, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you the truth. Nora's hand tightened on the rose stem, feeling thorns through her glove. This is Lily. Caleb reached out, and the little girl stood immediately, moving to his side with the automatic obedience of someone accustomed to following unspoken cues. She is my daughter. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Nora looked at the child, at Caleb, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what he had written in his letters. You never mentioned a child. No. The single word carried immense weight. I did not. He crouched down, bringing himself to the girl's eye level. Lily, this is Miss Ashford, the lady I told you about. The child said nothing, did not even nod. Simply looked at Nora with dark, serious eyes that seemed far too old for her small face. Caleb stood slowly. Lily does not speak, has not spoken since her mother died 2 years ago. He paused, and Nora saw him gathering courage for the next words. And she is not my blood daughter. I am caring for her. Adopted her after my friend her father died in the war. Nora understood then what he was telling her. Understood why he had hidden Lily's existence in his letters, why he had delayed 3 days before coming to the station. This child, this beautiful, silent, dark-skinned little girl, would make Nora's life infinitely more complicated in a territory where such things mattered to people who made judgments about bloodlines and propriety. If you want to leave, Caleb said quietly, I will pay your ticket back to Boston. I will give you money for your trouble. I will not blame you. But if you stay— He stopped, searched for words. If you stay, I promise you the truth from here on. No more secrets. No more lies. Just honesty, even when it is hard. Nora looked at him, this stranger who was supposed to be her husband. Looked at the exhaustion in his face, the way he held himself between her and the child as if to shield Lily from rejection. Looked at the girl herself, so quiet, so watchful, so clearly accustomed to being judged and found wanting. She thought about Boston, about the accusations that had driven her here, about the way people looked at her when they believed her guilty, the way their faces closed against her before she could speak in her own defense. She thought about her father dying alone because he could not bear to keep fighting battles already lost. And she thought about the letter in her valise, the one that had promised a place where no one asks questions about the past. Caleb had lied by omission, had withheld crucial information that might have changed her decision. But he stood here now offering truth even though it might cost him everything, offering honesty when concealment would have been easier. Nora looked at Lily and saw something shift in the girl's expression, some flicker of hope or fear or both. This child knew what it felt like to be unwanted, knew what it meant when adults made calculations about whether she was worth the trouble. I am still here, Nora said quietly. I came 2,000 miles for a partnership built on honesty. Are you offering me that, Mr. Hart? Yes? No hesitation. God, yes. Then we should talk, really talk about what this means. But she paused, choosing her words carefully. But I am not leaving. Not today. The relief that washed over Caleb's face was almost painful to witness. He had clearly expected rejection, had braced himself for it. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. Thank you for not leaving. Patterson, who had been listening with barely concealed interest, cleared his throat again. I will just see about your luggage then, Miss Ashford. An hour later, Nora found herself sitting across from Caleb Hart in the hotel restaurant, the same place where she had eaten sparse meals alone for 3 days. Lily sat beside Caleb drawing pictures on a piece of paper he had provided her attention, seemingly focused on her art, but her body language suggesting she heard every word. "I need to be very clear about something, Mr. Hart," Nora began. "Caleb, please. Caleb." She took a breath. "I did not come here looking for romance. I am not a girl with her head full of fairy tales. I came because you offered something I needed. Purpose, partnership, a place where my capabilities might matter more than my connections." He nodded slowly. "That is what I offered. That is what I am still offering. Then I need you to understand what I expect." Nora had thought about this through 3 sleepless nights. "I expect honesty even when it is difficult. I expect respect for my intelligence and capabilities. I expect that if you make a promise you will keep it, or you will tell me straight if you cannot." "That is fair." He spread his hands on the table, showing her the scars and calluses. "I am not good with words, Eleanor." "Nora," she interrupted. "Everyone who knows me calls me Nora." "Nora." He tested the name, seemed to like the feel of it. "I am not good with words, Nora. I am better with actions. I can promise you this. I will work every day to earn your trust. I will not ask for more than you are willing to give, and I will always tell you the truth, even when it makes me look bad." "Why were you really late?" He did not hesitate. The flood was real. "But I also delayed coming here because I was afraid." His voice dropped. "I am 36 years old. I have been alone since the war ended, since Sarah died. I built that ranch with my own hands, and it is good land, but it is empty. When your first letter came, I read it 20 times before I believed it was real. A woman like you, educated, well-spoken, clearly intelligent, wanting to come to Wyoming to marry a rancher who can barely write a decent sentence." "Your letters were fine," Nora said. "My brother helped with some of them." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Point is, I was afraid that when you saw me, you would realize you had made a mistake, that you would get back on that train, and I would watch another chance at a real life disappear." He glanced at Lily, who had gone very still beside him, her pencil motionless on the paper. "The closer I got to St. Joe, the more that fear grew. So I told myself I needed to make sure the cattle were settled first, that I should clean up more, plan better, be more ready. I used that flood as an excuse to delay facing the possibility that you would take one look at me and leave." He met Nora's eyes. "And then I had to decide whether to tell you about Lily right away or wait. I chose to tell you now because I will not build a life on lies. Not anymore." The honesty in his words cut through Nora's remaining anger. She had expected excuses, justifications. Instead, she received vulnerability, truth offered without armor. "I am still here," she said softly. "You are." He looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face. "Why?" "Because your letters promised partnership, and I need that more than I need romance or security or any of the things I am supposed to want." Nora leaned forward, aware of Lily's attention, despite the girl's apparent focus on her drawing. "I am tired, Caleb. I am tired of being decorative and useful, but never valued. I am tired of living in a world where appearances matter more than truth. Your letters talked about honest work and building something real. That is what I want. Can you still offer that?" "Yes." No hesitation. "God, yes." And Nora looked at the child directly. "What do you need from me regarding her?" For the first time, Caleb's composure cracked slightly. "I need someone who will treat her with kindness, who will not see her as something to be ashamed of or hidden away, who will understand that she has been through things that would break most adults and give her the patience she needs to heal." "I can do that," Nora said. "I can try at least. That is all I am asking." They sat in silence for a moment, taking each other's measure. Then Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. This was my mother's. He opened it to reveal a simple gold band, thin and worn smooth with age. "I know we have just met face to face. I know you need time. But I still want to marry you, Nora, not just to have a wife, but to have a partner, someone who will stand beside me, not behind me. Someone who will tell me when I am wrong and work with me when I am right." He paused, the ring box still open between them. "If you are willing, we can marry tomorrow and travel to Wyoming as husband and wife. You will have your own room at the ranch until you decide otherwise. We will build the trust you are asking for, and if you decide after a few months that this is not what you want, I will pay your passage back to Boston. No questions, no judgment." Nora looked at the ring. It was not expensive or showy. It was honest, like the man offering it. "What if I decide it is what I want?" Caleb's expression opened hope, breaking through exhaustion. "Then we will build a life together, a real one, the kind where you are my partner in every sense of the word." She thought of Boston, of Miss Porter's school, of the narrow life that waited for her if she went back. She thought of the warrant that would be issued, the trial that would be a spectacle, regardless of her innocence. She thought of her sister Margaret's letter still tucked in her valise, the one that had said, "Are you sure about this? Running off to marry a stranger seems desperate even for you." Maybe it was desperate. But maybe desperation was just another word for courage. "I will marry you tomorrow," Nora said, on one condition. "Name it. If I ask you a question, you will always give me an honest answer, no matter what the question is, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be." Caleb extended his hand across the table. "You have my word." Nora shook his hand, feeling the calluses, the scars, the strength of someone who had built a life through sheer determination. "Then we have an agreement." Beside them, Lily looked up from her drawing. She met Nora's eyes for the first time, and though she said nothing, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement. One damaged soul seeing another. They married the next morning at the Justice of the Peace, a small office that smelled of ink and old paper. Mrs. Brennan and Jack Sterling served as witnesses. Nora wore her best dress, dark blue wool with mother-of-pearl buttons. Caleb wore a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. Lily stood between them, holding both their hands. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. The justice read the words. They spoke their vows. Caleb slid his mother's ring onto Nora's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. "You may kiss your bride," the justice said. Caleb looked at Nora, a question in his eyes. She nodded, and he leaned down to press a brief, gentle kiss to her lips. It felt like a promise rather than a claim. When they stepped outside into the Missouri sunshine, Nora was a married woman, Mrs. Caleb Hart. The name felt strange and new and terrifying, but also right in a way she had not expected. "We will stay tonight at the hotel," Caleb said. "Separate rooms like we discussed. Tomorrow we take the stage to Cheyenne, then make our way to the ranch." He paused, then added quietly, "Thank you, Nora, for taking this chance. I will do everything I can to make sure you do not regret it." Nora touched the ring on her finger, feeling its weight. "I am choosing to believe you, Caleb. Do not make me regret that choice." "I will not," he promised. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Caleb bought supplies while Nora arranged her trunk. She also wrote a brief letter to Margaret. "I have married Caleb Hart," she wrote. "We leave for Wyoming tomorrow. I will write again when I am settled. Tell no one where I have gone." She did not mention the 3-day wait. Did not mention her fear or doubt or the way her hands had shaken when she signed the marriage certificate. Margaret would only worry and worry at 2,000 miles distance helped no one. That night, lying alone in her hotel room for the last time, Nora stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what came next. Wyoming territory. A ranch she had never seen. A man she barely knew. A child who did not speak. A life that existed only in letters and promises. She could still leave. The morning train to Boston would carry her away from this uncertain future, back to the known world of scandal and accusation. But at least it would be known. But she had already made her choice when she had climbed onto the westbound train in Boston 4 weeks ago. That Nora, careful and conventional and afraid, was gone. The woman who remained had survived 3 days of abandonment and chosen to stay anyway. Had married a stranger on faith and honesty. Had decided that an uncertain future was better than a certain cage. Nora closed her eyes and felt the weight of the ring on her finger. Tomorrow, the real journey would begin. Tonight, she simply needed to rest. In the room next door, Caleb lay awake as well, thinking about the woman who had agreed to marry him despite everything. He had expected anger when he arrived at the station, would have understood it, deserved it. Instead, Nora had listened, stated her terms, and chosen to trust him anyway. He had spent 12 years alone building his ranch and telling himself he was content with solitude. But Nora's letters had awakened something he thought the war had killed. Hope. Hope that he could have more than just survival, that he could build a life, not just an existence. Now she slept one wall away, wearing his mother's ring, bound to him by law, if not yet by love. He had one chance to prove himself worthy of the trust she had given, one chance to show her that the partnership he had promised was not just words on paper. He would not waste it. The next morning, they boarded the stage to Cheyenne. Mrs. Brennan stood on the boarding house porch waving goodbye. Patterson watched from the station platform. Jack Sterling tipped his hat as they passed. And in the shadows near the station house, a man in a dark suit and city shoes watched the stage depart. He had arrived in St. Joe just hours too late, following a trail that had led him from Boston through a dozen small towns, always one step behind the woman he sought. Detective Silas Vance pulled out a small notebook and made a note of the stage company and destination. Then he walked to the telegraph office to send a message back to his employer. Subject located. Married name Hart. Heading to Wyoming Territory. Continuing pursuit. He folded the telegram receipt and placed it in his pocket. Then he went to purchase a ticket on tomorrow's stage. Eleanor Ashford thought she had escaped her past, but the past Vance had learned in 20 years of detective work had a way of catching up eventually. The stage carrying Nora, Caleb, and Lily rolled west through the Missouri afternoon, carrying them toward a future none of them could yet imagine. Lily sat between her father and her new stepmother, quiet as always, but her hand rested lightly on Nora's sleeve, a small gesture of tentative trust. Nora looked out the window at the landscape passing by, at the way the land seemed to open up as they traveled, the sky growing larger with each mile. Behind her, St. Joe and its 3 days of waiting. Behind that, Boston and its accusations. Behind that, a life she could never return to. Ahead, Wyoming and whatever waited there. A ranch, a partnership, a child who needed healing, a man who promised honesty even when it hurt. And somewhere behind them, following on tomorrow's stage, a detective who believed in justice and would not stop until he found the truth about Eleanor Ashford and the death of a senator's daughter. But that confrontation lay in the future. For now there was only the stage, the journey, and the strange new family unit forming in the cramped space between destinations. Nora closed her eyes and let the rocking motion carry her forward, away from who she had been toward who she might become. The waiting was over. The real story was just beginning. The stage to Cheyenne crawled across the prairie like an insect crossing an ocean floor, small and insignificant beneath the vast dome of Wyoming sky. Nora had thought she understood. Space had believed Boston's harbor gave her some sense of openness, but nothing had prepared her for this. The land stretched in every direction until it met the sky at a horizon so distant it seemed to belong to another world entirely. Mountains rose in the west like broken teeth, their peaks still white with snow, despite the late spring warmth, and the wind moved across the grassland, invisible waves, bending everything in its path. She sat beside the window, Lily pressed against her side, and tried to reconcile the person she had been 4 weeks ago with the woman she was becoming. That Eleanor Ashford had lived in rooms with walls and ceilings, had walked on cobblestones and wooden floors, had existed in a world where human construction dominated the landscape. This Nora Hart traveled through emptiness so complete it felt like falling, like being swallowed by space itself. Caleb sat across from them, his long legs folded awkwardly in the cramped coach, his eyes tracking the landscape with the attention of someone reading a familiar text. Occasionally he would point out landmarks to Lily, his voice low and patient. That creek feeds into the Platte. Those hills mark the boundary of Cooper land. The girl never responded verbally, but her body language suggested she was listening, absorbing, remembering. They stopped at way stations that barely deserved the name, rough structures thrown up to service the stage routes, offering fresh horses and questionable food and privies that made Nora long for Boston's indoor plumbing. At one such stop, while Caleb saw to the horses and Lily used the facilities, a woman approached Nora where she stood stretching her legs in the dusty yard. "You are traveling with Caleb Hart," the woman said. Not a question. Nora turned to find herself facing a woman in her early 40s, sturdy and sun-browned, with gray threading through brown hair pulled into a practical bun. Her dress was simple calico, well mended, and her hands bore the calluses of someone who worked for everything she had. Her eyes held a directness that suggested she would tolerate neither evasion nor dishonesty. "I am." Nora kept her voice neutral. "I am his wife." The woman's expression shifted surprise, and something else flickering across her features. "Rose Cooper. My husband Tom and I have the place south of Hart's Creek." She extended her hand and Nora shook it, feeling the strength in those work-roughened fingers. Caleb did not mention he was bringing back a wife when he left 3 weeks ago. It was a recent decision, Nora said carefully. Rose's eyes moved past Nora to where Lily had emerged from the station house, her small hand finding Caleb's automatically. "And how do you feel about the child?" The question was blunt, almost aggressive, and Nora understood immediately that she was being tested. This woman cared about Lily, was protective of her in a way that spoke of genuine affection rather than mere neighborly concern. "I feel," Nora said, slowly choosing her words with care, "that any woman fortunate enough to marry Caleb Hart receives not one blessing, but 2. Lily is part of the family I chose when I married her father." Something in Rose's expression softened fractionally. "Sarah was my best friend. She loved that child like her own blood. If you hurt Lily, Mrs. Hart, I will make you regret it." "I understand," Nora said. "I would do the same if I were you." Rose studied her for a long moment, then nodded once sharply. "Come visit when you are settled. I will bring soup and bread to welcome you properly." She paused. "And Mrs. Hart, Caleb is a good man, but he has been alone too long. He will need patience while he remembers how to share his life." "Thank you for the warning," Nora said, and meant it. When they resumed their journey, Caleb glanced at her curiously. "What did Rose want to make sure I understand the consequences of treating your daughter poorly?" A smile ghosted across his weathered face. "That sounds like Rose. She and Sarah were closer than sisters. She has appointed herself Lily's guardian angel." "I like her," Nora said, surprising herself with the truth of it. The landscape grew rougher as they traveled the flat prairie, giving way to rolling hills cut by creeks and ravines. Pine trees appeared scattered at first, then clustering into forests that climbed the lower slopes of distant mountains. The air changed too, growing thinner and cooler, carrying scents Nora had no names for. Sage, Caleb told her when she asked. "And pine, and something else that is just Wyoming. You will know it when you smell it everywhere else and realize it is not the same." They reached the ranch on the 3rd day of travel, coming over a rise in late afternoon to see it spread below them in a valley carved by a creek that caught the sunlight and threw it back in silver flashes. The house sat low to the ground, built of logs and stone with a roof that had weathered to the color of old bone. A barn stood nearby, corrals fanning out from it in neat rectangles. Beyond that, the land rolled away in grass that moved like water under the constant wind. "There," Caleb said simply, and Nora heard pride in his voice and something else. Nervousness, perhaps, or the vulnerability of showing someone your private world and hoping they will not find it lacking. "It is beautiful," Nora said. And it was in a stark and unforgiving way. But even from this distance, she could see what Caleb's words had not prepared her for: the isolation, the complete and utter absence of other human structures, no neighboring houses visible, no roads beyond the track they traveled, just the ranch and the land and the mountain standing watch over both. Lily pressed closer to Nora's side as the wagon descended into the valley, and Nora realized the child was trembling slightly. She put her arm around the small shoulders and felt Lily lean into the embrace, seeking comfort, or offering it perhaps both. The house looked different up close. Larger than Nora had expected, but also darker, as if it held shadows that daylight could not fully penetrate. Several windows had their shutters closed despite the warmth of the afternoon. The porch that ran along the front was swept clean, but the chairs sitting there looked unused, and when Caleb opened the door, the interior smelled of dust and disuse, as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for them to arrive. "Let me show you inside," Caleb said quietly, and Nora heard in his voice the same tension she had heard when he revealed Lily's existence. This was another truth being offered, another layer of honesty that might change her perception of him. The main room was larger than she had anticipated, dominated by a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. Furniture sat arranged with military precision, clean but sparse. A table with 4 chairs, 2 armchairs flanking the hearth. Shelves holding perhaps 20 books, their spines faded from sunlight and time. Everything was meticulously maintained but profoundly impersonal, as if the person living here had been trying not to leave any mark of personality on the space. "Kitchen is through there," Caleb said, pointing to a doorway. "Bedroom here, and the loft above." He did not mention the closed door at the far end of the main room, but Nora's eyes were drawn to it anyway. "What is through that door?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Sarah's sewing room. I have not opened it since she died." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief, still fresh despite 2 years of burial. Nora looked at Lily and saw the child had gone very still, her eyes fixed on that closed door with an expression that was part longing, part fear. "Your bedroom is here," Caleb said, opening the door he had indicated. "I prepared it before I left for St. Joe." The room was simple but clean, a bed with a frame clearly built by hand, a dresser, a washstand, a window looking east toward the mountains that caught the last of the afternoon light and held it like a promise. The bed was neatly made with a quilt Nora suspected had been Sarah's work, and the floor was swept clean of even the finest dust. "It is good," Nora said, setting down her traveling bag. "Better than I expected." Relief flickered across Caleb's face. "I know it is not fancy." "I did not come here for fancy," Nora reminded him. "I came for real. This is real, Caleb. It is honest work made into shelter. That matters more than fancy ever could." He stood in the doorway, backlit by the main room's windows, and she saw him relax fractionally. "I will get your trunk from the wagon and tend the horses. You should rest. It has been a long journey." "Where does Lily sleep with me?" "In the loft." He paused. "Unless you think she should have her own room. I could clear out Sarah's sewing room if you think that would be better." Nora looked at the child who had followed them to the bedroom door and now stood watching this exchange with dark, serious eyes. "I think Lily should sleep wherever she feels safest. If that is the loft with you, then that is where she belongs." Something passed across Lily's face. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that suggested approval or perhaps gratitude. That night, their first in the house that was now supposed to be home, Nora lay in the bedroom and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. The wind was constant, a low moan that never quite stopped, and somewhere cattle lowed to each other across the distance. Above her, through the ceiling boards, she could hear the quiet murmur of Caleb's voice as he talked to Lily, getting her settled for sleep. The words were indistinct, but the tone was gentle, patient, the voice of a father who loved his child completely and without reservation. Nora thought about the closed door, about Sarah's sewing room sealed like a tomb, about the way Caleb had looked when he mentioned it, as if even speaking the words cost him something precious. This house was haunted, she realized, not by ghosts in any supernatural sense, but by memory so strong it had physical weight. Sarah was everywhere here, in the quilt on the bed, in the precision of the kitchen organization, in the closed door that no one could bring themselves to open. And Nora, lying in Sarah's bed wearing Sarah's husband's ring, was expected to somehow carve out space in a home that still belonged entirely to a dead woman. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it brought a strange clarity. She had come to Wyoming to escape her past, but Caleb was still living in his. They were both haunted, both carrying ghosts they could not put down. Perhaps that was why his advertisement had called to her across all those miles. Perhaps damaged, recognized damaged, even through the careful language of matrimonial correspondence. Morning came early, announced by roosters Nora had not realized they owned, and the sound of Caleb moving through the house with practiced quiet, trying not to wake her. She rose anyway, dressed quickly, and emerged from the bedroom to find him building up the fire in the hearth, his movements economical and efficient. "You did not have to get up," he said, looking surprised to see her. "I know you must be exhausted. I want to learn the rhythms of this place," Nora said. "I cannot do that from bed." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Coffee first, then I will show you how things work." They fell into a routine over the following days, and Nora began to understand the enormous amount of work required to keep a ranch functioning. Caleb rose before dawn to check the cattle and horses. Nora made breakfast, learning the quirks of the wood stove and the limited supplies available. Lily moved between them like a small ghost, helping where she could, but never speaking, communicating instead through gestures and expressions that Caleb seemed to understand perfectly. Rose Cooper arrived on the fourth day, as promised, bringing soup and fresh bread and an assessing gaze that took in everything about how Nora had arranged the kitchen, how she moved through the space, how she interacted with Lily. They sat at the table while Lily played quietly near the fireplace, and Rose asked questions with the directness of someone who had no patience for social niceties. "How are you managing?" "Well enough," Nora said. "It is an adjustment, but not an unwelcome one." "Caleb treating you well?" "Better than well. He is exactly what he promised to be, honest, respectful, kind." Rose's expression suggested she approved of these answers, and Nora glanced at the child who was arranging small stones in complex patterns on the hearth. "She does not speak to me yet, but she allows my presence. I consider that progress." "It is," Rose said. "She has not spoken to anyone but Caleb since Sarah died. We thought perhaps she never would again." "What happened?" Nora asked carefully. "Caleb told me Sarah died in childbirth, but he did not give details." Rose's face tightened. "There was a problem with the delivery, bleeding that would not stop. We sent for the doctor in Marston, but by the time he arrived, there was nothing to be done. Sarah died holding Lily, telling her to be brave. The image was visceral and terrible." Nora thought of her father, of the patience he had lost despite his best efforts, of the way death came sometimes regardless of skill or intent, and the baby stillborn, a boy. Rose's voice was flat, as if she had told this story enough times that it no longer carried emotional weight. "We buried them together in the plot behind the house. Lily was there, saw everything. She spoke at the funeral, said goodbye to her mother, has not said a word since." Nora felt something twist in her chest. That poor child. "Caleb blames himself," Rose continued. "Thinks if he had gotten the doctor sooner, or if he had taken Sarah to Denver for the birth, she might have lived. I have told him 100 times that there was nothing anyone could have done, but grief makes us irrational." "It does," Nora agreed, thinking of her father's suicide, of the way guilt had eaten him alive despite his innocence. Rose leaned forward, her voice dropping. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. Can you love that child? Not pretend to love her, not tolerate her out of duty, but actually love her the way she deserves to be loved?" Nora thought about the question, about the easy answer versus the honest one. "I do not know yet," she said finally. "Love takes time, I think, but I can tell you this. I will protect her. I will be patient with her. I will work every day to earn her trust. And if love comes, it will be real, not performance." Rose sat back, studying Nora's face. "That is a good answer. Better than if you had promised immediate devotion." They talked for another hour, and when Rose finally prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Tom and I are having difficulties," she said abruptly. "He drinks too much, has nightmares from the war. Some nights I think about leaving, taking the children and going back east." Nora heard the confession for what it was. An offering of trust, vulnerability, shared in exchange for vulnerability. "Have you told him how you feel?" "He knows, but knowing and changing are different things." Rose's smile was bitter. "Marriage is harder than anyone tells you when you are young and foolish enough to believe love conquers everything." After she left, Nora found herself thinking about Tom Cooper, about the nightmares and drinking, about the weight that war left on men, the invisible injuries that never quite healed. She thought about her medical books packed carefully in her trunk, the knowledge her father had passed down through patient teaching and observed practice. Perhaps there were things she could do, herbs that might help with sleep, techniques for managing the memories that would not stay buried. But that was a problem for another day. First, she needed to solve the more immediate puzzle of the silent child who watched her with such careful attention. The breakthrough came unexpectedly 2 weeks after their arrival. Nora had been working in the kitchen when she heard a sound from the main room, a small whimper of distress. She found Lily on the floor near the hearth, blood dripping from her hand, where she had apparently cut it on a sharp stone. The child's face was white with pain and fear, but she made no sound beyond that initial whimper. "Let me see, Nora," said gently, kneeling beside her. Lily pulled her hand back, cradling it against her chest, her eyes wide and distrustful. "I am not going to hurt you," Nora said. "I want to help. My father was a doctor. He taught me how to tend wounds." The child remained frozen, watching Nora with the wary attention of something that had learned the hard way that adults could not always be trusted. Nora thought for a moment, then made a decision. She held out her own hand, palm up, and mimed cutting it. Then she touched her chest and pointed to where her medical supplies were stored in the bedroom. She repeated the gesture, making it clear she wanted to help, not harm. Lily's eyes narrowed slightly, processing this. Then slowly she extended her injured hand. The cut was not deep, but needed cleaning and bandaging. Nora worked quickly and efficiently, her father's training guiding her movements. She washed the wound with water, boiled for safety, applied a salve, made from herbs she had brought from Boston, and wrapped it in clean cloth. Through it all, Lily watched her face with fierce concentration, as if memorizing every expression, every gesture. When Nora finished, she sat back on her heels and smiled. "There, that should heal well if you keep it clean." Lily looked at her bandaged hand, then at Nora. And then slowly, deliberately, she raised her good hand and touched her fingers to her lips, then extended them toward Nora. "Thank you," Nora whispered, recognizing the sign. Lily nodded once, then stood and walked to where she kept her slate and chalk. She wrote something carefully, then turned the slate to face Nora. The words read, "Can you teach me more?" Nora felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Teach you what?" Lily erased the slate and wrote again, the hand talking. "Like deaf people use. Where did you see that?" "There was a girl at church, before Mama died. She could not hear. Her mother talked with hands." Lily's chalk moved quickly across the slate. "I want to learn." Nora understood immediately. This child had spent 2 years locked in silence, unable or unwilling to form words with her voice. But perhaps she did not need voice. Perhaps there were other ways to communicate, other languages that did not require sound. "I can teach you," Nora said. "I have books about it. My father used signs sometimes with patients who could not speak." Lily's face transformed, not quite a smile, but something close, something that suggested hope. That night, after Lily had gone up to the loft, Nora told Caleb what had happened. He listened with an expression that shifted through surprise, wonder, and something that might have been the beginning of tears. "She wants to communicate," he said. "After 2 years of silence, she wants to learn how to talk again. Just not with her voice," Nora said. "At least, not yet. But Caleb, if she can sign, she can tell us what she needs, what she feels, what she thinks. That is a kind of speaking." "Teach her," Caleb said. "Teach her everything you know." Over the following weeks, Nora worked with Lily every afternoon, using her father's medical texts and her own improvisation to create a basic sign language vocabulary. They started simple: yes and no, please and thank you, hungry and tired, happy and sad. Lily absorbed the signs like rain into parched ground, her small hands forming the shapes with increasing confidence. And then one evening, while Caleb was outside checking the horses and Nora was preparing supper, Lily came to stand beside her at the stove. She waited until Nora looked down, then signed carefully. "Why are you here?" The question was complex, requiring signs they had not yet learned, but Nora understood the essence of it. "Because I needed somewhere to go," she signed back, using simple gestures. "Because I was in trouble." What trouble? Lily's hands moved quickly, now gaining fluency. Nora hesitated, then decided on truth. "People said I hurt someone. A girl at my school. She died and they blamed me." Lily's eyes widened. "Did you—" No, Nora signed. "But they did not believe me." The child studied her face for a long moment, then her hands moved again. "Papa says people lie about him too, because I am different." The words, even in sign, carried enormous weight. Nora knelt down to Lily's eye level. "You are not different in any way that matters. You are smart and kind and brave. Anyone who says otherwise is wrong." Lily's lower lip trembled slightly. Then, before Nora could react, the child stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Nora's neck, hugging her with fierce intensity. Nora held her, feeling the small body shake with silent sobs, and thought about the ways people could be damaged by the cruelty of others, about the scars that never showed on skin, but lived instead in the careful distance people maintained in the walls they built to protect hearts that had been broken too many times. When Caleb came in 20 minutes later, he found them sitting together by the fire, Lily on Nora's lap, both of them quiet but no longer separate. The child had fallen asleep in Nora's arms, and Nora sat stroking her hair with gentle repetition. She told me, Nora said quietly, about people judging her. Caleb's face tightened. What did you say? That anyone who judges her is wrong. That she is perfect, exactly as she is. His eyes grew bright. Thank you, he said, for seeing her, really seeing her. I see both of you, Nora said. The weeks accumulated into a month, then two. Nora learned the ranch's rhythms, the endless cycle of work that defined frontier life. She cooked and cleaned and tended a garden she planted near the house, coaxing vegetables from Wyoming soil. She helped Caleb with the cattle when he needed an extra pair of hands. She taught Lily not just signs, but reading and arithmetic, using the few books available and improvising lessons from the world around them. And slowly, so gradually, she almost did not notice it happening, the house began to feel less like Sarah's shrine and more like a home they were building together. It was late July when the accident happened. Caleb had been repairing the barn roof, replacing boards that had rotted over the previous winter. Nora was in the garden with Lily when they heard the crack of breaking wood, followed by a cry of pain that sent ice through her veins. They ran to the barn to find Caleb on the ground near the ladder, his face white with shock. His right leg bent at an angle that made Nora's stomach turn. The ladder lay beside him, one rung clearly broken. Do not move, Nora said, dropping to her knees beside him. Her mind cataloged details automatically, years of watching her father work, overriding panic. Where does it hurt? Leg, Caleb managed through gritted teeth. Heard it snap when I landed. Nora's hands moved gently over his leg, feeling for the break. He hissed when she touched a spot just above his ankle, and she felt the unmistakable shift of broken bone beneath her fingers. Not a compound fracture, thank heaven. The skin was not broken, but definitely fractured and badly. I need to set this and splint it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. It is going to hurt. Do what you need to do, Caleb said. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping. I trust you. Those 3 words steadied her more than anything else could have. Nora turned to Lily, who stood watching with wide, frightened eyes. I need you to run to the house, she signed quickly. Bring me clean cloths, the bottle from the medicine cabinet, and 2 straight pieces of wood from your father's workshop. Can you do that? Lily nodded and ran. When she returned, Nora prepared herself for what came next. She had watched her father set bones half a dozen times, had even assisted once with a boy who had fallen from a tree. But this was different. This was Caleb, her husband, and her hands were shaking as she positioned herself at his leg. Drink this, she said, uncorking the whiskey. All of it. He drank without argument, then lay back and closed his eyes. Do it quick. Nora took a deep breath, gripped his ankle and calf, and pulled with firm, steady pressure while simultaneously pushing the bone back into alignment. Caleb made a sound between a groan and a scream, his whole body going rigid, but the bone slid back into place with a sensation she felt more than heard. Working quickly before pain could make him fight her, she positioned the splints on either side of his leg and began wrapping them with strips of cloth, binding them tight. Caleb had gone very still, his breathing ragged, sweat beading on his forehead despite the afternoon heat. Done, Nora said softly, tying off the last bandage. The worst is over. His eyes opened unfocused with pain and whiskey. You sure you were a teacher? That was better than most army surgeons I knew. My father was a very good teacher, Nora said. Now we need to get you inside and into bed. Getting Caleb into the house was an exercise in patience and determination. Even with Lily helping as much as a 6-year-old could, every step sent agony through his leg. By the time they reached the bedroom and maneuvered him onto the bed, they were both shaking with effort. I will get you water, Nora said. But Caleb caught her wrist. The cattle he managed. They need checking tomorrow morning. If I am not up, I will check them. Nora covered his hand with hers. I have been riding with you for weeks. I know what to look for. He looked like he wanted to argue, but pain and whiskey were pulling him under. His eyes drifted closed, and within minutes, his breathing had deepened into something approaching sleep. Nora stood over him, looking at this man who had become so central to her life in such a short time. Seeing him vulnerable like this stirred something in her chest that felt dangerously close to the kind of caring that could break you if tested. When had that happened? When had Caleb Hart stopped being a stranger? She had married out of necessity and become someone whose pain made her own heart hurt. She pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down to keep watch. Through the window she could see the sun sinking toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. The ranch would need tending tomorrow, and she would do it. Not because she had to, but because this was her home now, and Caleb was her partner, and you did not abandon your partner when he fell. Night came, and Nora dozed fitfully in the chair, waking periodically to check on Caleb. He slept restlessly, occasionally, crying out in pain or confusion. Twice she had to wake him from nightmares that had nothing to do with his broken leg, and everything to do with the war that still haunted him. Each time she took his hand and spoke quietly until he settled her presence, anchoring him back to the present. By morning, Nora was exhausted but determined. She made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, forced herself to eat breakfast she did not taste, and went out to saddle the horses. Lily helped signing questions about whether Papa would be all right, and Nora reassured her as best she could. The morning was cool and beautiful, the kind of Wyoming dawn that could break your heart with its perfection. Nora rode the fence line alone, checking each cluster of cattle, looking for signs of distress or illness, just as Caleb had taught her. One cow had a slight limp that concerned her, and she made a mental note to tell Caleb when she returned. Everything else seemed fine. The herd peacefully grazing calves, staying close to their mothers, the bull maintaining his watchful distance. She was back at the barn within 2 hours, unsaddling her horse with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The fear that had gripped her yesterday had transformed overnight into something else, a fierce protectiveness, a determination that Caleb would heal properly because she would make certain of it. Inside she found him awake, propped up on pillows, his face still pale, but his eyes clearer than they had been the night before. "You went out alone," he said, not quite an accusation. "I told you I would." Nora reminded him, pouring him water. "Everything is fine. One cow has a slight limp on her right foreleg, but she is not favoring it badly. I will watch her tomorrow." Caleb drank the water gratefully. "You did good. I can handle more than you think," Nora said. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Nora woke before dawn to tend the cattle and horses returning to make breakfast, and check on Caleb before heading out again to tackle whatever tasks the ranch demanded. Lily helped where she could, signing questions and observations, gradually becoming more confident in her ability to communicate. And Caleb, confined to bed, grew increasingly frustrated with his helplessness. He tried more than once to get up to help, but Nora was inflexible. He would heal properly, or she would know the reason why. In the evenings, after the work was done, she would sit beside his bed and they would talk, really talk, in ways they had not before. About his childhood in Pennsylvania, about the war, about Sarah's death, and the guilt that still consumed him. About Nora's father, about the accusations that had driven her west, about her fear that she carried some curse that destroyed everyone she tried to help. "I was married before," Caleb said one evening about a week after the accident. The words came quietly, almost reluctantly. "During the war. Her name was Martha Whitfield." Nora went very still, listening carefully. What happened to her typhoid swept through the camp where she was nursing. Took her in 3 days. His voice was flat, the pain of it buried deep but still present. "We had been married 6 months. I was at the front when it happened. Did not even get to say goodbye." "I am so sorry," Nora said. "It has been 14 years. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "After Martha died, I thought I would never marry again. But then years later, I met Sarah, Lily's mother. She was a widow with a small ranch near mine. We married quietly, and when her health began to fail during pregnancy, I promised I would care for Lily as my own if anything happened." He looked away. "I just never thought I would have to keep that promise." "I am so sorry," Nora said. "It has been 14 years, but sometimes it feels like yesterday." He looked at her directly. "That is part of why I waited so long to marry again. Was not sure I could survive losing someone else." "Is that why you wanted a partnership instead of a romance?" "Partly." He turned her hand over in his, studying her palm as if reading her future there. "But also because I thought a partnership was more honest. Romance fades, passion cools, but respect, shared work, genuine friendship. Those things can last if you tend them properly. Nora thought about this, about the way they had built something real over the past weeks through shared labor and honest conversation. You might be right about that. His smile was gentle. Might be. You doubting my wisdom, Mrs. Hart. The name still gave her a small thrill. I am reserving judgment. They were still talking when they heard it. The sound of hoofbeats approaching the house unusual enough at this hour to make Nora tense. She went to the window and looked out to see a man dismounting in the yard, a stranger in city clothes that marked him as profoundly out of place in this landscape. "Caleb," she said quietly, "someone is here." He tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his leg. "Who, I do not know." "A man. Well-dressed. He looks like he is from back east." Even as she said it, Nora felt ice settle in her stomach. She knew with terrible certainty who this stranger was, even before he knocked on the door. Caleb called out, "Come in." The door opened and the man stepped inside, removing his hat politely. He was perhaps 45, with graying hair and sharp eyes that took in everything, cataloging details with the attention of someone trained to notice. When his gaze landed on Nora, recognition flashed across his face. "Mrs. Hart," he said. "Or should I say Miss Ashford?" Nora felt the room tilt slightly. Beside her, she heard Caleb's sharp intake of breath. "My name," she said carefully, "is Nora Hart." The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Of course, forgive me. I am Detective Silas Vance, hired by the Thornton family of Boston to locate their daughter's killer." He turned his attention to Caleb. "Mr. Hart, I believe. I apologize for intruding, but I need to speak with you about your wife's past, about the accusations she fled rather than face, about the death of 10-year-old Catherine Thornton, who died of arsenic poisoning 3 months ago while under your wife's care." The words fell into the room like stones into still water, and Nora watched the ripples spread across Caleb's face. Shock, confusion, and beneath it all, the terrible understanding that she had lied to him by omission, just as he had once lied to her about Lily. The silence stretched between them heavy, with all the things that had been left unsaid, all the secrets that would now have to be spoken aloud. And in that silence, Nora felt the life she had been building begin to crack beneath her feet. The silence that followed Detective Vance's words was absolute, the kind of quiet that precedes storms or violence, or the complete shattering of carefully constructed worlds. Nora stood frozen near the window, her hand still resting on the frame, watching Caleb's face as comprehension moved across it like shadows over landscape. She saw the exact moment when understanding arrived, when the pieces assembled themselves into a picture she had never given him the chance to see whole. His eyes, those gray eyes that had looked at her with such warmth only hours before, went carefully blank. Not angry yet, she thought, just shutting down, protecting himself against a betrayal he had not anticipated. Detective Vance stood in the doorway, hat in hand, wearing the expression of a man who had delivered difficult news many times and found no satisfaction in it. He looked older up close, Nora noticed, with the strange clarity that shock sometimes brings. Lines bracketed his mouth and fatigue lived in the set of his shoulders. This was a man who had traveled far for answers, driven by something more than simple employment. "Mr. Hart," Vance said quietly, his voice carrying none of the triumph Nora might have expected. "I apologize for the intrusion, particularly given your condition." He gestured toward Caleb's splinted leg. "But I have been pursuing Miss Ashford for 3 months now, and I believe you deserve to know the truth about the woman sharing your home." "Get out," Caleb said. His voice was flat, empty of inflection. Vance did not move. "With respect, sir, this concerns a child's death, a senator's daughter. The accusations are serious." I said, "Get out." Caleb tried to sit up further, his jaw clenched against the pain the movement caused. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it to me in private, not in front of my family." "Your family," Vance repeated, and something almost like sympathy crossed his features. "Mr. Hart, are you aware that your wife is wanted for questioning in a poisoning case, that she fled Boston rather than face investigation?" Nora found her voice, though it came out thinner than she wanted. "I am not wanted. There is no warrant, only accusations." "Not yet," Vance agreed, turning his attention to her. "But the Thornton family is pressing for one. Senator Thornton has considerable influence. It is only a matter of time." Then you have no authority here, Caleb said. You are a private detective, not law enforcement, which means you are trespassing. Vance's expression hardened slightly. I am trying to find justice for a dead child, Mr. Hart. A 10-year-old girl who trusted her teacher and died in agony. Surely you can understand that. What I understand, Caleb said carefully, each word measured and deliberate, is that you have traveled a long way to make accusations against my wife based on what exactly suspicion, political pressure from a grieving father. His eyes never left Vance's face. Unless you have evidence, actual evidence, you need to leave my property. Now. Vance studied Caleb for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But Mr. Hart, I would advise you to ask your wife about the autopsy report, about the arsenic found in young Catherine's system, about why she ran instead of staying to defend herself. He placed a card on the table near the door. I am staying at the boarding house in Marston. When you are ready to hear the truth, you can find me there. He left as quietly as he had arrived, and the sound of his horse's hooves fading into distance felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Nora and Caleb sat in the silence he left behind, not looking at each other, the space between them suddenly vast, despite the small room. She could feel Lily somewhere behind her, the child's presence, a silent witness to the disintegration of everything they had been building. Tell me, Caleb said finally. His voice was still that same flat, empty tone. Tell me all of it, from the beginning. Nora moved to the chair beside his bed, her legs unsteady. She sat slowly, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking, and tried to find the words that would make him understand. Her name was Catherine Thornton, she began, 10 years old, beautiful, intelligent, beloved by everyone who knew her. She came to Miss Porter's school in January of last year. I was her primary teacher for literature and history. Go on. Nora took a breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes, even though what she saw there made her chest ache. In March, Catherine began showing symptoms: fatigue, nausea, weakness. Her mother attributed it to the stress of adjusting to a new school. But the symptoms worsened. By April, she was vomiting frequently, losing weight, complaining of pain in her chest. What did you do? I begged her parents to take her to a physician. I wrote letters expressing my concern. But Senator Thornton was occupied with political matters, and Mrs. Thornton believed I was being hysterical. She paused, remembering the frustration of watching a child deteriorate while those with power to help dismissed her warnings. Finally, in late April, they agreed to have their family doctor examine her. And he said she had a weak constitution, prescribed bed rest and tonics. Nora's hands clenched in her lap. I did not believe him. My father had taught me to recognize certain signs, certain patterns. Catherine's symptoms suggested something more serious, something cardiac. But you were a teacher, not a doctor. Yes, which meant no one would listen to me. Nora felt the old anger rising, the helpless fury of being right, but powerless. Catherine died on May 3rd, collapsed during afternoon lessons, was dead before the doctor arrived, and the autopsy showed traces of arsenic in her system. Nora met his eyes directly. The Thornton family immediately accused me, said I must have been poisoning her, that I had access to her food and drink during school hours. The newspapers picked up the story within days. Why would they think you did it? Because they needed someone to blame. Nora's voice broke slightly. Because their family doctor had missed a congenital heart defect that had been killing Catherine slowly since birth. Because admitting that would mean lawsuits, scandal questions about their choice of physician. Easier to blame the teacher, easier to create a villain than to accept that sometimes children die and there is nothing anyone can do. The arsenic, Caleb said. How do you explain that I cannot? Not completely. Nora leaned forward. But Caleb, arsenic was in everything back then, wallpaper, medicines, even cosmetics. Catherine could have been exposed any number of ways. The autopsy showed trace amounts, not the levels you would expect from deliberate poisoning. But you ran, instead of fighting the accusation. Yes. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because my father had been falsely accused, had fought and lost, despite his innocence, and I watched it destroy him. I saw how the system protects the powerful and crushes anyone who dares to challenge them. Senator Thornton has influence I could never match. In court, it would not matter what the truth was, only what he could make people believe. So you came here, married me under false pretenses." "Not false," Nora said urgently. "Everything I told you was true. I just did not tell you all of it. That is called lying by omission, Nora." Caleb's voice was still eerily calm, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. "It is what I did with Lily, what you were angry about. I know." She felt tears building but forced them back. "I know, and I am sorry. I wanted to tell you. After you told me about Lily, after you promised honesty, I wanted to, but I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you would look at me the way you are looking at me now. That I would lose you, lose the life we were building." Her voice cracked. "That I would have to keep running forever because nowhere would be far enough to escape what they say I did." Caleb closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them again, she saw something that looked like pain. "I showed you Lily. I gave you my truth, my vulnerability, my trust. And you kept this from me. I am sorry. Are you—" his eyes searched her face. "Or are you just sorry you got caught?" The question landed like a physical blow. Nora stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. She moved to the window and looked out at the ranch that had become her home, the land that had started to feel like salvation. Beyond the barn, she could see the small cemetery where Sarah and her stillborn son lay buried. Another ghost. Another reminder that she was an intruder here, unwelcome and undeserving. When she spoke, her voice was steadier than she felt. "If I had poisoned that child, I would tell you. I would rather you know me as a murderer than think me a coward, but I did not do it, Caleb. I tried to save her. I failed, but I tried." She turned to face him. "I understand if you want me to leave. I understand if you cannot forgive this, but do not question whether I am sorry. I am sorry I lied. I am sorry I put you and Lily at risk. I am sorry I brought this to your door. But I am not sorry I came here, and I am not sorry I married you, because even if it ends tomorrow, these past months have been the first time I have felt like a person instead of a problem since my father died." The silence that followed felt eternal. Nora watched Caleb's face, saw him processing, weighing, deciding. She had gambled everything on his capacity for forgiveness, on the partnership they had been building. Now she waited to learn if that foundation was strong enough to bear this weight. Finally, Caleb spoke. "Come here." She crossed the room slowly, uncertain. When she was close enough, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, but not harsh. "I am angry," he said quietly. "I am hurt that you did not trust me enough to tell me. But, Nora, I am not going to throw you to Vance like meat to a wolf. You believe me. I do not know yet what I believe about the accusation. But I believe that you are afraid, and I believe that fear makes people do things they would not otherwise do." He paused. "If I hand you over to Vance, I am no better than the people who judge Lily for her skin color. I am no better than the ones who assume guilt without evidence. What are you saying? I am saying we fight. Together." He pulled her closer. "You and I made vows, Nora. Partnership, remember. That means when one of us falls, the other helps them stand. It means we face things together, even hard things, even things that scare us." Nora felt something break loose in her chest. Some knot of fear she had been carrying for so long it had become part of her structure. "You would do that, even knowing I lied. You think I am some saint who has never lied." Caleb's smile was bitter. "I lied to every woman who answered my advertisement, told them I was alone when I had a child. Told myself it was not really lying, just omitting details. We are both guilty of the same sin, Nora. The only question is whether we are going to let it destroy what we have built. I do not want that. Neither do I." He squeezed her hand. "So we fight. But Nora, no more secrets. If there is anything else I need to know, anything at all, you tell me now." "There is one thing," she said slowly. "The autopsy report. Vance mentioned it, but what he does not know is that I took a copy, stole it from the examiner's office the night before I left Boston." "Why?" "Because it shows the truth. It shows Catherine had an enlarged heart-damaged valves, scarring consistent with long-term cardiac disease. It shows the arsenic levels were minimal trace amounts that could have come from anywhere." She looked at him steadily. "It proves what I have been saying, that she died of a heart condition, not poisoning, that the Thornton family doctor missed it, and they are covering up his incompetence by blaming me. Where is this report?" hidden in the false bottom of my trunk. I have been carrying it since Boston, afraid to use it, but unable to let it go." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "That is evidence, Nora, real evidence. Why did you not mention it to Vance?" "Because I am wanted for theft of official documents. Taking that report was a crime." She laughed without humor. "I fled one accusation and committed another crime in the process. The irony is not lost on me." "We need to think about this carefully," Caleb said. "If that report proves your innocence, it is worth the risk of the theft charge. Maybe, or maybe it just gives them another reason to lock me away." They sat in silence, hands still joined, thinking through impossible choices. Then movement at the doorway caught their attention. Lily stood there, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her small hands moved in frantic signs over and over. "Do not let them take Mama. Do not let them take Mama." Nora felt something crack open inside her chest. The child had called her Mama before in signs, but never with this desperate intensity, never with such raw fear. Caleb's voice was rough. "We won't, Lily. I promise." Nora held out her arms, and Lily ran to her, burying her face against Nora's shoulder. The child's small body shook with silent sobs, 2 years of fear condensed into this single moment. "I will not let anyone take me away from you," Nora whispered, signing the words against Lily's back so the child could feel them. "I promise." Nora felt something crack open inside her chest, some reserve of strength she had not known she possessed. She held out her arms, and Lily ran to her, burying her face against Nora's shoulder. The child's small body shook with the force of emotions finally released, 2 years of silence breaking like a dam. "I will not let anyone take me away from you," Nora whispered against Lily's hair. "I promise." It was a promise she had no authority to make, no power to guarantee, but she made it anyway and felt Caleb's hand come to rest on her shoulder, his touch a silent affirmation. They would fight this together, the three of them. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. Detective Vance returned 2 days later, and this time Caleb was prepared. He had spent those 2 days in bed under Nora's watchful care, and they had spent long hours discussing strategy, examining the autopsy report, building their defense. Rose Cooper had visited, and upon hearing the situation, had offered fierce support that surprised Nora with its intensity. "If that man thinks he can come into our territory and drag away one of our own," Rose had declared, "he has another thing coming. Tom and I will stand with you, and so will every other rancher within 50 miles once they hear what is happening." Now Vance sat in their parlor accepting coffee with the polite formality of a man who understood the rules of frontier hospitality even while pursuing his investigation. Caleb sat in a chair near the fire, his leg propped on a stool, and Nora stood behind him with one hand on his shoulder. Lily remained in the loft, but they could hear her moving quietly above them, listening. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Vance began. "I appreciate that this is difficult. Difficult does not begin to describe it," Caleb said. "You have accused my wife of murder based on the word of a politician who wants someone to blame for his daughter's death. I am not accusing anyone, Mr. Hart. I am investigating. There is a difference. Then investigate this." Nora stepped forward and placed the autopsy report on the table between them. "This is the official medical examination of Catherine Thornton's body. Read it carefully, Detective. Tell me if it sounds like death by poisoning." Vance's eyebrows rose. "How did you obtain this?" "Does it matter? Read it." He opened the document, his expression shifting from skepticism to concentration as he read. Nora watched him process the information, saw the moment when his certainty began to crack. "This shows a congenital heart defect," he said slowly. "Severe damage to the cardiac muscle. Scarring that suggests years of progressive disease." "Yes," Nora's voice was steady. "Catherine Thornton was dying long before she entered my classroom. The family physician missed it either through incompetence or because he was not looking for it. When she died suddenly, they needed an explanation that would not implicate their trusted doctor. So they blamed you. So they blamed me." She leaned forward. "Detective Vance, I have a question for you. Why are you really here? You said you were hired by the Thornton family, but there is more to it than that. I can see it in the way you talk about Catherine. This is personal for you." Vance was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I lost my daughter 7 years ago. Emily. She was 8 years old. He looked down at his hands. She had scarlet fever. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, but I have always wondered. If we had gotten her to a better physician sooner, if we had tried different treatments, maybe she would have lived. I am sorry, Nora said quietly. When Senator Thornton hired me, when he told me about his daughter dying under a teacher's care, I saw a chance to do for him what I could not do for myself. A chance to find justice, to hold someone accountable. He met her eyes. I wanted you to be guilty, Mrs. Hart. I wanted it to be simple. Evil teacher poisons innocent child. Justice served. But it is not that simple. No. He gestured to the report. This complicates everything. If what you say is true, if the family doctor missed this defect and they are covering it up, then you are being scapegoated for someone else's negligence. It is true, Nora said. Every word. Vance sat back, the exhaustion on his face suddenly more pronounced. The problem is proof. This autopsy report will help your case, but it is stolen property. Using it makes you vulnerable to additional charges. I know. Nora glanced at Caleb, drew strength from his steady presence. But it is the only evidence I have that Catherine died of natural causes rather than poisoning. What about the arsenic? Vance's detective instincts were still active, despite his doubts. The report confirms traces were found. Trace amounts, Nora emphasized. Detective, have you investigated the Thornton household? Their wallpaper, their medicines, Catherine's cosmetics, and treatments. Arsenic was everywhere in that world. Finding trace amounts proves nothing except that she lived in 1876. Vance was silent, thinking. Then he said something Nora had not expected. I believe you. The words hit her with such force she had to sit down. You do? I have been doing this work for 20 years, Mrs. Hart. I have learned to recognize when someone is lying and when they are telling the truth. He tapped the autopsy report. This document, your knowledge of the case, the way you speak about Catherine, it all suggests you genuinely tried to help her. And more than that, he paused. My instincts tell me you are not a killer. You're just someone who made the mistake of threatening powerful people by being right when they needed you to be wrong. Then what happens now? Caleb asked. Now, Vance said slowly, I have a decision to make. I can take this report back to Boston, present it to the Thornton family, and recommend they drop their pursuit. Or I can tell them you refuse to cooperate, that you are hiding out here and should be brought back to face questions. And which will you choose? Before Vance could answer, the door burst open and Tom Cooper stumbled in his face, flushed, his words slurred with drink. Rose followed close behind, her expression caught between fury and despair. Tom, please, she was saying. Not now. But Tom pushed past her, pointing an unsteady finger at Vance. You need to leave. This is not your business. These are good people, and you have no right to come here making trouble. Mr. Cooper, Vance said, carefully standing. Perhaps you should go home and sleep this off. Do not tell me what to do, Tom snarled. I fought in the war while men like you stayed safe at home. I know what real evil looks like, and it is not this woman. The scene was deteriorating rapidly. Caleb tried to stand, wincing at the pain in his leg. Tom calmed down. But before anyone could intervene, Lily appeared at the top of the loft ladder. Her voice, still new and uncertain from disuse, cut through the chaos with surprising clarity. But before anyone could intervene, Lily appeared at the top of the loft ladder. For the first time since Sarah's death, she opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice, still new and uncertain from disuse, cut through the chaos with surprising clarity. Stop yelling. You are scaring Mama. The room went silent. Every eye turned to the child descending the ladder with careful dignity. She walked straight to Nora and took her hand, then turned to face Vance with the kind of courage that only comes from absolute conviction. My Mama did not hurt anyone, Lily said. She helps people. She helped Papa when he was hurt. She helped me learn to talk again. She is good. The simple words spoken in a child's voice that had been silent for 2 years carried more weight than any legal argument could have managed. Nora felt tears streaming down her face and made no attempt to stop them. She knelt down and pulled Lily into her arms, holding her fiercely. Vance stood watching this tableau, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up the autopsy report and folded it carefully. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, I will be returning to Boston tomorrow. When I arrive, I will be presenting this document to the Thornton family, along with my recommendation that they cease their pursuit of Mrs. Hart. Relief flooded through Nora so intensely she thought she might faint. However, Vance continued, his voice hardening, if I discover that anything you have told me is false, if I find evidence that you did harm Catherine Thornton, I will come back, and next time I will bring a federal marshal. Understood, Caleb said. Vance moved toward the door, then paused. Mrs. Hart, one more thing. The family doctor who examined Catherine. Do you remember his name? Dr. Edmund Cartwright, Nora said. Why? Because if what you say is true, he is responsible for medical negligence, at minimum, possibly manslaughter. The Thornton family may have protected him initially, but if I can prove he missed an obvious diagnosis, they will have to answer difficult questions. He tipped his hat and left. Through the window they watched him mount his horse and ride toward Marston, carrying with him their hopes for vindication. Rose helped Tom out to their wagon, apologizing profusely for his behavior. But before she left, she pulled Nora aside. What he said in there, drunk as he was, he meant it. You are one of us now. We protect our own. The weeks that followed were tense with waiting. Nora threw herself into ranch work, into caring for Caleb, as his leg healed, into teaching Lily, who spoke more each day, her vocabulary expanding like a flower opening to sun. They did not speak much about Vance or Boston or what might be happening back east. There was nothing to do but wait and trust that truth would prove stronger than influence. The letter arrived in late September, delivered by the same stage driver who had brought them to Cheyenne months before. Nora's hands shook as she opened it, Caleb and Lily watching anxiously. Inside was a brief note from Detective Vance and a newspaper clipping from the Boston Herald. Mrs. Hart, the note read, the enclosed article should answer your questions. Dr. Cartwright has confessed to negligence. The Thornton family is pursuing no further action against you. You are free. Vance. The newspaper article detailed the scandal. Dr. Edmund Cartwright, prominent Boston physician, had admitted to missing obvious signs of congenital heart disease in multiple patients, including Catherine Thornton. An investigation had revealed a pattern of incompetence covered up by wealthy families who valued social connections over medical expertise. Senator Thornton, facing public outrage, had issued a statement apologizing for the false accusations against Miss Eleanor Ashford and acknowledging that his daughter had died of natural causes. Nora read the article 3 times each reading, making it feel more real. She was cleared. The warrant that had never been officially issued would never come. She could stop running. You are free, Caleb said softly, reading over her shoulder. You can go back to Boston if you want. Resume your life there. Nora looked around the small cabin that had become her home, looked at Caleb with his healing leg and his honest eyes, looked at Lily, who watched her with an expression that tried very hard to be brave but could not quite hide the fear. I am already home, Nora said. That night, after Lily had gone to sleep in the loft and the house was quiet, except for the ever-present Wyoming wind, Caleb and Nora sat together by the fire. The awkwardness that had existed between them since Vance's first visit had been fading gradually, but traces of it remained like the ghost of an old injury. Nora, Caleb said quietly, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? Coming here, marrying me, all of it? She thought about the question, about the terrified woman who had stood on a platform in St. Joe 3 months ago, about everything that had happened since. I regret lying to you, she said finally. I regret that I did not trust you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning, but regret coming here, regret marrying you. She moved closer to him on the bench they shared. Caleb. I came to Wyoming running from my past. I stayed because I found a future worth fighting for. This ranch, this life, Lily, it is more real than anything I ever had in Boston. Even with all the hardship, the isolation, the work, the danger. Especially with those things she said, they make it real. They make it earned. Nothing was earned in Boston. Everything was inherited or purchased or awarded based on connections. Here every meal we eat, every fence we mend, every day we survive, we earn it together. Caleb's hand found hers. I love you, he said simply. I think I have for weeks now, but I did not want to say it until... He paused. Until I knew you were staying by choice, not necessity. I love you too, Nora whispered. And I am staying by choice, no other reason. The kiss that followed was different from their brief wedding kiss, all those months ago. This one held weight and promise, and the kind of intimacy that comes from choosing each other repeatedly day after day, in full knowledge of flaws and fears and the capacity to hurt one another. When they pulled apart, Caleb stood carefully testing his healing leg and extended his hand. "Will you come upstairs with me? Not to the loft, but to the bedroom, to our bedroom." Nora took his hand and let him lead her across the main room past the closed door of Sarah's sewing room that would need to be opened someday, but not tonight, into the bedroom that she had been occupying alone. They came together slowly, gently, two people who had been dancing around this moment for months. There was awkwardness, as there always is with new lovers learning each other's rhythms, but there was also tenderness and patience, and the bone-deep relief of finally being able to express physically what they had been building emotionally. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Caleb's arm around her and her head on his chest, Nora felt something settle into place inside her. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, not rescue or escape, but partnership. Not romance or passion, though those had come too, but something deeper. The choice to build a life together, one honest day at a time. By late autumn of 1876, 6 months after the accident, Caleb's leg had healed completely, leaving only a slight limp when he was tired. Winter came and went, harsh but survivable, the three of them weathering storms and cold together. Lily spoke freely now, her voice clear and confident, though she still used sign language when words felt inadequate. And Nora had stopped looking over her shoulder, for pursuers had stopped flinching at the sound of unfamiliar horses approaching. Spring of 1877 arrived in Wyoming with the rushing sound of snowmelt in the creek and the brave emergence of wildflowers from ground still half frozen. Nora stood in the garden she had planted last summer, now expanded and carefully planned for the new growing season, and watched Lily chase chickens with the kind of unfettered joy that came from being allowed to be a child. Lily spoke freely now, her voice clear and confident, though she still used sign language when words felt inadequate. And Nora had stopped looking over her shoulder, for pursuers had stopped flinching at the sound of unfamiliar horses approaching. They had opened Sarah's sewing room in February, the three of them together. Inside they found beautiful things, unfinished quilts and dresses, half made a rocking chair by the window. Lily had chosen some of Sarah's fabric for a dress Nora helped her make, and Caleb had brought the rocking chair out to the main room where Nora used it for mending in the evenings. It had been a small act of integration, acknowledging Sarah's place in their family without letting her ghost dominate their present. Rose Cooper had become a true friend, visiting weekly for coffee and conversation. Tom had stopped drinking, helped by a combination of Nora's herbal remedies and Rose's firm insistence that he face his demons rather than drown them. Their marriage was healing slowly but visibly, and seeing it gave Nora hope for all the damaged things in the world that people chose to mend rather than discard. Now, watching Lily play in the spring sunshine, Nora rested her hand on her belly where new life grew. She had not told Caleb yet. Wanted to wait until she was certain, though her body had already given her all the signs she needed. A baby. Their baby. The final piece of the family they were building. Mama Lily called out, "Look what I found." She ran over, clutching something small and brown. A baby rabbit newly emerged from its burrow, too young yet to fear humans. Nora knelt down to examine it with her daughter, showing her how to hold it gently, how to respect its fragility. "We should put it back where you found it," Nora said. "Its mother will be looking for it." Lily nodded seriously and carried the rabbit back to the bushes near the creek. Nora watched her go, this child who had been so broken and was now healing, and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. A horse approached from the direction of Marston, and Nora tensed reflexively before recognizing the rider, the mail carrier making his weekly rounds. He handed her 2 letters, tipped his hat, and rode on. One letter was from Margaret, her sister's first communication since Nora had written to announce her marriage. Nora opened it with trepidation, expecting judgment, or "I told you so," but found instead something close to apology. "Dearest Eleanor," it read, "I have seen the newspapers. I have read about Dr. Cartwright's disgrace and the clearing of your name. I am ashamed that I did not believe you from the beginning, that I let you run away alone instead of standing with you. If you can forgive me, I would very much like to visit and meet your husband and the child you wrote about. I want to be part of your life again if you will let me." Nora set that letter aside to answer later when she had processed the complicated emotions it stirred. The second letter bore a Boston postmark but was not in Margaret's hand. She opened it curiously and found a brief note signed by the headmistress of Miss Porter's school. "Dear Mrs. Hart," we read, "we have learned of the grave injustice done to you and wish to extend our most sincere apologies. Your position here remains open should you wish to return to teaching. The girls speak of you often and with great fondness." Nora read the letter twice, then walked to the fire and dropped it in. The flames consumed it quickly, turning formal apology and conditional job offer to ash. That part of her life was over. Whatever teaching she did now would be here with Lily and eventually with other children in the territory who needed education. Caleb came in from the barn to find her standing by the fire watching the last of the letter burn. "What was that, my past?" Nora said, "going up in smoke where it belongs? Any regrets?" She turned to face him, this man who had promised her partnership and delivered so much more. None. Not one single regret. He pulled her close and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Soon she would tell him about the baby. Soon they would begin preparing for another addition to their unlikely family. But for now, there was just this moment, the warmth of his arms, the sound of Lily singing to herself outside, the knowledge that she had finally stopped running and started living. The ranch spread out around them, demanding and beautiful and entirely theirs, not inherited, not gifted, built with their own hands and hearts, and the daily choice to stay when leaving might be easier. That afternoon, while Lily napped and the house was quiet, Nora found Caleb mending a bridle near the barn. Her heart hammered as she approached, though she could not say whether from nervousness or joy. Caleb looked up immediately, reading something in her expression. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." She took his hand and placed it on her belly, holding it there. "Everything is very, very right." He stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly across his face. "Nora, are you saying—" "I am with child. Late spring, I think. May or early June." For a moment he simply stood there, his hand still pressed to her stomach where their baby grew. Then his face crumpled, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. After everything, after all the fear and fighting and nearly losing you, we get this too. We get this too." Nora confirmed, her own tears falling freely now. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright. "Are you happy? Truly happy?" "Happier than I knew was possible," she said. "Scared? Yes. But happy." Caleb laughed, the sound breaking with emotion. "We will face the fear together, just like everything else." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally, her mouth. "Thank you for staying, for choosing us, for giving me a family I never thought I would have again." That evening, as the sun set over the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Nora stood on the porch with Caleb and Lily on either side of her. They watched the light change, transforming the familiar landscape into something momentarily magical. "Tell me again," Lily said, "about how you waited for Papa." Nora smiled, recognizing the request for what it was. Not just a story, but a family origin myth that the child needed to hear, repeated, reinforced, made real through retelling. "I waited 3 days at a train station in Missouri." Nora began the words as familiar now as prayer. "I was alone and afraid and almost out of hope. And then your father arrived late but honest, and he brought the most precious gift I could have imagined. You." Lily beamed, never tiring of this narrative that placed her at the center of their becoming. "Were you scared?" the child asked, though she knew the answer. "Terrified," Nora admitted. "But sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we need most to do." Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "And what would you tell that woman now?" he asked quietly, the one standing on the platform. Nora thought about Eleanor Ashford, 27 years old, wanted for a crime she did not commit, desperate enough to marry a stranger and flee to the wilderness. She thought about all the fear and doubt and pain that woman had carried, and what she would say if she could speak to her across the months that separated them. "I would tell her," Nora said slowly, "that the waiting is worth it, that the fear passes, that 3 days of uncertainty is a small price to pay for a lifetime of belonging. She looked at the ranch, at the house they had filled with life, at the land they worked together, at the family they had chosen and built and fought to keep. I would tell her that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what matters most, that running can lead you exactly where you need to be if you are brave enough to stop when you get there. Lily reached up and took both their hands, linking the three of them together. The last light faded from the sky, and the first stars emerged bright and cold and infinite. The wind carried the scent of sage and pine and the promise of the growing season ahead. Inside the house, Sarah's rocking chair waited by the fire. In the garden, seeds planted with hope pushed toward sun. In the barn, horses and cattle settled for the night. And in Nora's body, new life grew secret and sacred and sure. This was home, not a destination, but a choice made new each morning, not escape, but arrival. Not an ending, but a beginning that would unfold day by day, season by season, in the space between what was lost and what was found. The three of them stood together on the porch as night claimed the valley, a family forged from broken pieces and made whole through the patient work of love. The waiting woman had stopped waiting. The silent child had found her voice. The lonely rancher had discovered that solitude could be transformed into communion, and the story that had begun with abandonment and fear and desperate hope had become something none of them could have predicted, had become home.